Hello and welcome to another special episode from me, Anne Diamond, here on Viking.TV. Well, today we are in Portsmouth, England. It's a city that's traditionally very famous for being the home of the Royal Navy, but it's also globally known as the home of some very historic ships indeed. Ships that were built here and that sailed from here and took part in major events throughout history. Behind me, the HMS Warrior. She's beautiful, isn't she? Just over there, HMS Victory, which was of course Nelson's flagship at the Battle of Trafalgar. Sadly, I can't show you that today because she's covered in tarpaulin. She's undergoing renovation. But anyway, I want to tell you today the story of a ship that goes even further back in history. It was said to be the favourite of Henry VIII. It was his flagship warship, built in something like 1512 and sadly sank in 1545 at a very famous battle that happened just about a mile away in the sea behind me. The incredible thing about the Mary Rose is that she sank very, very suddenly. 500 people on board, only 35 survived, and it is said that Henry VIII was absolutely broken-hearted when she sank. Ever since then, people have been wondering about whether they would ever be able to raise her from the deep.
1545. England and France are, as usual, at war. From land, King Henry VIII, at this point married to wife number 6, orders his flagship, the Mary Rose, to attack the invading French fleet. The Mary Rose fires her guns, takes on water, and sinks with her entire crew. It would then be over 400 years until the remains of the Mary Rose were discovered.
Once they'd found the Mary Rose, of course, then there was the big decision that had to be made on whether or not it was realistic to try and raise her. So they had to get together a team of divers and lots of helper divers from all over the world. They had to get archaeologists and engineers to team together and figure out whether it really was feasible. And amazingly, it was. In 1982, and I remember watching it on the TV from my own home, they raised the Mary Rose. She came out of the sea and her timbers saw the first light of day in 400 plus years. It was incredible to watch, but then of course they had to figure out what to do about it. What do you do with a ship that's a good 400 years old, that's been lying in the silt at the bottom of the sea? Well, this is what they ended up doing.
They built the Mary Rose Museum. Let's hear from the dedicated team from the Mary Rose Trust, including diver Christopher Dobbs and Chief Maritime Archaeologist Margaret Rule. This is the extraordinary story of a Tudor warship raised from the dead. So they left her in the dry dock where she'd been brought, and they literally built the museum on top. And now you can see all of the Tudor artefacts found inside. Everything from a sailor's rosary beads to the everyday bits and pieces of Tudor life. So many shoes, and even the skeleton of the ship's dog. And according to DNA work performed on his teeth, he was a young adult male between 18 to 24 months with a light brown coat. He may have spent his entire life on board the Mary Rose, rarely, if ever, going on shore. Probably a terrier, a better rat catcher than any cat. But nothing quite prepares you for the first sight of this ship as you enter the cavernous main hall and you see the Mary Rose for yourself, now standing upright and as though she's been sliced in two along her length so that you can see inside. Projected onto the ship's carcass, cameo scenes of life for the crew on board, all working at their own jobs, from cooking to firing cannons. You feel like you're walking inside history.
So let's go in and have a look, and have a look as well at the new experience they've built into the museum. It's called 4D, and it gives you the idea of what it was like to be one of the divers who carried out this amazing task.
It's here. You are one of the first to see this. We have finally found the Mary Rose.
Well, the very first time we saw the ship, we saw 8 or 9 timbers, rectangular timbers, just protruding from the seabed 3 or 4 inches. But as we cleared away the mud with our hands, the timbers were sharp and clear, as good as the day the ship sank.
At first, it was a great mystery. We were just so excited.
This trench revealed the ship is resting on her starboard side, her right-hand side. And as you can see, the decks, the timbers, and the planking are all in very good condition.
I think I said immediately, if she is there where those timbers are, if that's her, then we've got a whole museum full of objects in that mud.
As we removed the layers of silt, we started to find more and more and more objects.
Chris Dobbs was one of the very first divers on the project.
So, Christopher, this is the real Mary Rose, and it's amazing to be able to see her like this. She looks a bit different from how you first saw her.
Yes, well, you say saw her. I mean, I dived on the Mary Rose first in 1979. In fact, exactly 40 years ago this week. And the visibility was so bad, you could hardly see in front of your face. Actually, 45 years ago, I think. But now she's up, and she's magnificent in the museum here. And you can see all the decks, the upper deck, the main deck, the all-op deck, and then you can see behind us the end galleries where we have thousands of the objects, and many of them are actually displayed beneath us here, exactly opposite where we found them underwater.
Well, this is what's so fascinating. When you were able to clear away the silt and everything, and you were able to actually get your hands on some of the things that were still in those cabins, you were one of the first people who actually laid your hands on them. What sort of excitement ran through you at that point?
Oh, well, just very exciting. At every dive you might find something different. And in fact, just behind us here was the carpenter's cabin. And that was just absolutely stuffed full of carpentry tools. And we had to take the partitioning off the front of it before we went inside it. And I feel it's like a Tutankhamun moment, where, you know, Howard Carter's looking through a tiny chink into the grave of Tutankhamun, and
So
Carnarvon says, "What do you see?" And he says, "Wonderful things."
Yeah, and that's what
Wonderful.
you saw.
And that's
you
what we
started to
saw.
see
Exactly.
more and more wonderful things coming up.
Exactly.
I mean, and you mentioned there the carpenter's place, and the fact that he had a trunk, he had a sea chest. And so many of them did. There were lots and lots of sea chests on this ship.
Yes, certainly the more important people on board would have had a chest. And what's so wonderful about that is in this museum, we've been able to bring out the chest. That was one of my specialities, was bringing out these chests in one piece with all their contents. And that's so exciting because you find out about individual people. You know, some of them are learned and have books. Some have amazing pocket sundials. Then you see their shoes, you see their rosaries, you see their knit combs, you see their ear scoops, and all these aspects of Tudor life that you'd never expect to find on a warship that's been underwater for 437 years.
Yeah, I mean, in essence, this is a time capsule. But I think a lot of people watching will wonder, why didn't those things rot away years and years ago?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And it's because the silt, the wreck very, very quickly filled up with silt. A bit like the ash falling on Herculaneum or Pompeii. And once it had filled up with silt, it was anaerobic. There's no oxygen in that silt. So the wooden objects and leather objects aren't eaten away by the bugs and beasties, particularly something called the shipworm, which eats away at any wood. And she was completely buried under the seabed. And that, again, is one of the magical things about her and about the excavation. It was all completely buried under the seabed.
And that's where you start to see some of these very personal things that, to me, doesn't say this is just a shipwreck. This is about human beings on board. How many were on board?
Well, there were over 500 on board when she sank. The official accounts say the crew was about 430, but that wouldn't include officers and their retinue. So it really was a very, very big disaster in its day.
And the ship also went down in minutes, didn't it?
Yes, it would have sunk very quickly.
Sink?
There's a combination of reasons why it sunk, and then there's all the conspiracy theories of why it sunk. But I think the most important thing, if you're looking at why it sank is not to go for the conspiracy theories, but to go for accounts made by eyewitnesses. And particularly there was one eyewitness who was actually on board but survived. And he wrote in a letter something like, it was a calm day and there was a gust of wind and she heeled over and they had failed to close the gun ports. So that really does suggest that it was more human error. And it certainly wasn't anything to do with design, in my opinion, because she was 34 years old when she sank. She did not sink on her maiden voyage, which is a myth that
she'd put in many years of
exactly,
service, hadn't she?
Exactly.
And been Henry VIII's favourite flagship at many times. And I mean, and you can see how beautiful she is. You mentioned gun ports there, of course. You come across some amazing guns.
Yeah, exactly. And they were literally sticking out through each of those gun ports on the main deck. So when we found the ship, they were still sticking out and they were rammed into the silt under the ship. So we display them exactly opposite where they were found. And that's a very powerful message. And we even had the gun port lids that are on the outside of the ship. We can actually see the inside of the ship from this angle. But I mean, the whole excavation and raising and creating this museum, it's been just an amazing task.
It was like swimming into Aladdin's cave.
It's like Pompeii. It's like walking into the past. I don't know any land site that could give you as much excitement and so much reward.
I need your help lifting this cannon. Look to your left. Can you quickly reach up and check the strops are secure? Okay, let's get this cannon up to the surface.
Then for the salvage, we had to use a very special method. And the first part of that was to get an underwater lifting frame, which was brought over from Southampton. And this was actually then lowered over the wreck of the Mary Rose on specially prepared holes that we dug before. So that was put in place over the Mary Rose. Then what we needed to do was to put in place every single one of these cross beams. So I've put about 6 in already here, but here's another one. And this job with these beams weighing about 2 tons each was done underwater, and each of them was carefully placed into the lifting frame and positioned exactly above the 11 strongest parts of the ship. So for each of these lifting points, we had to dig tunnels under the hull so that we could get to each of these bolt positions, put in the bolts, and then put in the wires. So these are the wires that we're putting in here. So we put wires in, and the hull was connected up to the cradle at every single one of these lifting points through the hull. So when we finished putting those wires in, the whole ship was then suspended underneath this lifting frame. And then the next really clever part of the salvage was that this lifting frame was actually jacked up these legs just a few inches over a period of a day or two. So the very first raising of the Mary Rose wasn't done by a great big crane like Togmore. It was done with 3 jacks on the corners of all 4 legs, so it was done extremely slowly. Once the hull was then hanging, literally hanging from this lifting frame, then we got the Togmore, the great big crane, to lift up this lifting frame and transfer it over to a cradle that had been brought in. So if we now bring this cradle in, this was again brought out and lowered to the seabed near to the Mary Rose. So that's placed on the seabed, all ready for the final lift. And then Togmore, the big crane, picked up the ship, and this again was one of the really crucial parts of the lifting, this underwater transfer, as it was called. And so the whole ship was then lifted up, literally hanging from the lifting frame that we'd attached it to with all those wires. And then it was brought in very, very carefully over the cradle, and you can see these 4 legs. They then needed to locate into stabbing guides, these yellow cup things, for it to bed down. And all of that was quite a difficult operation, to be honest. Just to get these to locate, there were a lot of difficulties doing that. In fact, the way we did it in the end, we had to have one diver on each corner saying when each leg was located. But that was the system for getting them. And then, on the morning of October the 10th, 1982, the lifting wires were already attached, and this enormous crane, Togmore, started the lift and gently raised the ship from the seabed. And then a barge was brought in and put under the ship, and the ship was lowered down onto the barge and eventually, very late that evening, brought into Portsmouth dockyard. So that's how the Mary Rose was salvaged.
Years after we discovered the first timbers, the Mary Rose was finally lifted off the seabed.
The ship had just been raised off the seabed, and I put my hand on it, and you could actually feel the whole ship just swaying in the current. It was just a most amazing moment, because that's when you could feel that the whole ship was in one piece.
When we lifted the Mary Rose from the seabed, it was a minor miracle. And then the movement underwater and the correct docking into the cradle was crucial.
The lifting frame is not engaging with the cradle. They are now putting divers on each corner to try and line it up. We can't abort the lift. No, no. This has to go today.
The only way to get the frame to dock was for a Royal Engineer diver to cut off the bent leg.
Yes, the hull is docked in the cradle. Let's hope it all holds together for the final lift to the surface.
Timbers of the Mary Rose, flagship of the Tudor fleet, had not seen daylight since she foundered on this spot in July 1545. But on this rainy day in October 1982, the Mary Rose broke the surface to the sounds of a celebration. Prince Charles, whose personal involvement in the project has helped to raise the £4 million the underwater excavation has cost, took to a boat to view the wreck at close quarters. Safety pin supporting one of the legs of the lifting frame had collapsed under the strain. A close inspection showed a few timbers damaged, but nothing, in the words of one spokesman, that couldn't be put right by a carpenter and a joiner in a couple of days.
How do you feel?
Well, she was ours when she was down there. Now she belongs to everybody. But look at those deck beams. I mean, that's a damn strong ship, isn't it? It's a hell of a ship. When you think of everything she's gone through, not only during the excavation, and still those deck beams haven't collapsed. It's totally remarkable.
If you just think about the first timbers that were exposed in 1971, and then you think everything else there that you see in the ship hall was actually dug up by mostly amateur divers, literally by hand, it shows you what an enormous human endeavour it actually was.
To bring her ashore
means that generations of people to come can rediscover that ship and reinterpret her for themselves. And that, I think, is the correct reason for recovering her.
I was actually the diver underwater at that moment when the ship first lifted off the seabed. And I could feel the whole thing just gently swaying in the current. And that's the moment we knew that she was safely off the seabed and in one piece, because the whole ship was just slightly swaying together. And that was a very, very magical moment.
And the next magical moment was when, because the world was watching. Were you very aware that you were working on something that was the Tutankhamun moment in a way? The world was watching and waiting for this frame to come up. And then we saw the tips, just as you'd seen them in the seabed. We saw the tips of those timbers coming up into the daylight. Extraordinary moment again.
This is, but actually I didn't see the tips coming up into the daylight because I was underwater. So I saw it from below as it went up through the surface. And, you know, that's when all the guns went off and the champagne corks popped, because the Mary Rose had finally come back to the surface after 437 years.
And there were a few dodgy moments. One of the legs gave way or something, didn't it? And astonishingly, it didn't harm the Mary Rose very much at all, and brought her into dry dock. And then you've got to figure out how you conserve her, and then how you, over many years, you figure out how you're going to be able to show her off to the public.
Yes, exactly. And that's been the task, you know, since 1982 when we brought her in. So she's still in that dry dock, but we've built this museum around her.
We're in the dry dock that she was first brought into.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
But I remember coming many, many years ago, and she was just a bit like that, very, very much in the dark, and being sprayed constantly.
Yes.
Why was that?
Well, although the timbers look in very good condition, they have been affected by the silts over the hundreds of years. And we first sprayed it with chilled fresh water just to keep it in good condition while the scientists worked out the best way to conserve her. Then we sprayed her with a solution of water-soluble wax called polyethylene glycol from about 1980. The polyethylene glycol was about 1994 to 2013. So that was the wax, and the wax then penetrated right into the wood, and then from 2013 to 2016 it could be dried out. And so now it's all the cells in the wood are supported by the wax. So the cells don't collapse, so the wood doesn't collapse. So, I mean, again, that was a magnificent feat of human endeavour to do the conservation of the ship.
I mean, looking at it now from our perspective, she looks almost like a model. She's very big when you get up close, though, isn't she? And you can see all the different layers of the men working below, right up to the top layer. How tall are those layers? Would they take a man of your height?
Yes, in fact, a lot of people, you hear members of the public saying to their children, oh, they must have been small people in those days. They were actually average height 5'7", similar to European males 50 years ago. And the decks are very generous. I mean, I was in charge of putting all these decks back in place from 1990 to 1993, and I'm 6'2", and I could walk along all of those decks, and the only time I hit my head was when I had to duck under one of the beams that separate the different areas, and because I was wearing a hat, and of course you're taller in a hat.
Yes.
So they actually had very generous head height in the Mary Rose. It's only later ships like the Victory where they squeeze in an extra gun deck, and that's when they have the very low decks. But because she's only got one main gun deck and then the upper gun deck, and then lots of guns also in the high castles you can just see on the right of the picture there, the head height was actually much more generous than later ships.
If you look at that famous picture of the Mary Rose, she's got the bit at the back, which is called the
stern.
The stern, thank you. But that's quite built up in Tudor days. It was a very fancy piece of architecture, really, wasn't it?
Yes, well, I mean, the Mary Rose, I mean, it's important for so many reasons, but one thing is she was a very evolutionary, or you could say revolutionary ship. In her early years, it was more like being a troop ship. And what you would do is you would put all your soldiers on board and you'd go out and you would grapple another ship and you'd all run off the other ship. And there was a great advantage in having height. So we had these things called the stern castle and the bow castle. So these were high areas of the ship at each end, because then you could shoot down at the enemy with your longbows. I mean, we had longbows on board, hundreds of them. And this is, 130 years after Agincourt.
I think this is the biggest collection of Tudor longbows ever found.
Absolutely,
But it's also the biggest collection of Tudor artefacts ever found.
Yes, I mean, it really is stunning. And, you know, to have, I mean, and every aspect of Tudor life is there. Not just military life and guns and things to do with sailing, but people's personal lives. And that's what makes it so, you can really empathise with the crew when you see their possessions in this museum.
And there's even the ship's dog.
Even the ship's dog. My wife found that. And
Really?
she's now a veterinary surgeon.
So she was diving with you?
Yeah, she came, I was diving as a professional, but she came as one of the amateur divers. Over 500 amateur divers did most of this work. They would come for their holidays for 2 weeks to do the excavation. And she happened to be working in the area where the dog was.
Where was he?
He was actually just near to the carpenter's cabin. Just near to the entrance.
She found a collection of bones.
Yeah, and wait till you see the dog. I mean, it's stunning how, I'm so proud of her, because you can see all the tarsals and metatarsals, the tiny bones, and imagine what it's like trying to collect up every single bone of that dog. I mean, it was just stunning.
And through DNA, which they found in, I think, the dog's teeth, they were able to find out what sort of breed it was.
Yes, I mean, they didn't have breeds exactly like they have nowadays, but certainly from the structures of the bones and then from all the scientific testing, it's amazing to be able to work out more about the dog. And we would never have guessed, if we made a list of things we might find on the ship, we would never have guessed that we'd find somebody's dog or the ship's dog. It would have been very good for catching rats.
Is there any more of the Mary Rose to be found?
There is, in fact. I mean, you can see at the very far end, well, at the near end, you can see the higher part of the stern castle.
Yes.
At the very far end, there would have been a bow castle to match. And all those timbers are still underwater, but safely protected under the silts.
So one day you might go back for more?
One day we could, but it would be extremely expensive. And we absolutely need every penny we can get at the moment just for running and conserving and curating what we've got now. So it's a lovely dream. I'd love to do that because diving and finding these things underwater is so exciting. But we have to be realistic because we're also, you know, we're a charity. We don't have any government taxpayers' money. So we have to do all this just from box office receipts and donations. So it's quite difficult.
But when you did those first dives and you were able to establish this is the Mary Rose, I don't imagine you could even have guessed at that point how that was going to affect the rest of your life.
Personally, no, I had no idea that 44 years later I'd still be here at the Mary Rose. But there's so much more work to do. And I think one of the really big challenges is working out how to present a ship and a collection like this to the public, and that's been very rewarding.
I love to see the artefacts, and you've got some up close and personal here. Talk me through them.
Well, some of these are real objects that were on board the ship, and some of them are replicas.
Right.
But starting with some of the real ones, here is one of the stone shot. I mean, literally it was made of stone. So see what that's like. So imagine we had shot of stone, shot of iron, and shot of lead, and that's a stone one.
Oh.
So the iron ones and the lead ones were even heavier than that.
Well, no wonder that can bust through the side of a ship. Exactly. It's very heavy.
And then here are some timbers or bits of timber that were found on the ship. This one's interesting because it's got a hole for a tree nail. So tree nails are like wooden pegs, and that's what held the ship together. And that's why the ship was able to be raised, because it didn't have metal bolts that would have rusted. It was held together by wooden pegs.
One of those sort of drills?
Yes, a big drill,
yes.
And then rammed the pegs in really fine. But this is my favourite because this is a lump of the real Tudor cable that we found. But if you could smell that,
ooh.
I mean, that smell of tar,
it's bitter.
That is a genuine smell from 1545. It hasn't been treated.
But that is a genuine bit of Tudor rope.
Exactly. And what I think is amazing is that smells can survive from the past
yes.
as well as the objects themselves. And
but
that's what
how much rope did you find?
Oh, there's absolutely tons of it. You can see out there. I can't remember how many hundreds of meters, but a ship like this would have needed an awful lot of rope. And this is really big cable, possibly anchor cable.
Yes.
So we provide this because it's really good if visitors can actually experience things while they're here.
I bet most don't they think that's a replica because it just looks too pristine, doesn't it?
Yeah, but again, to just smell something like this is just stunning. You know, if we can build a museum that will appeal to all the senses and where people can actually try things out and look at things and smell things and hear things.
I can't get over the rope. The rope means I don't know why it's so impressive.
It is quite amazing, especially to be able to smell it. You know, smell from 437 years ago.
Okay, what have we got here?
This is actually a linstock. So this is a replica because the originals are too sort of
precious,
fragile.
Yeah.
But this was used by the gunners so that they didn't have to light the gun with their fingers, as it were. So they could stand back.
They lit the end and then poked it in.
That. And what is so wonderful about them, they're all carved individually. So they probably carved their own linstocks. And one of them even has the marks of where there must have been a flash or burning, and the fuse, where the fuse is, isn't burnt. But it's just wonderful. I mean, you can just imagine the Tudor gunner just whittling away at that in a spare evening.
Well, that's what is so amazing about a lot of the artefacts you found, but actually the whole of the Mary Rose, it's not just a working gunship, it's actually a thing of real beauty.
Yes,
isn't it?
yes, and the way they've carved these things, and they're carved so that they would know exactly which is their linstock, and they were also usually carved to the right length for the gunner.
Yeah.
Some of them even had a spike in the end, so that they could perhaps just push them down like that and leave them in the deck. Because what you don't want is for this end, with the lighted match, to be anywhere near the wood.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, absolutely fantastic.
That's another replica?
That's a replica of an arrow.
But that's how big they would have been?
Yes, yeah. And, you know, we also found a box with 3,000 arrows or something.
My goodness.
So we've got almost a monopoly of Tudor bows and arrows in the whole world. Like we have a monopoly of most of the objects we got here. They are absolutely unique.
How did you find these amazing longbows?
Well, some of them were just found loose on the deck, so they must have been in use. Literally, an archer must have just used it when the ship sank. But others were actually found in storage chests. And I found 2 of the chests on board the ship and raised them in one piece. So one of them had...
Must be very long.
Yeah, they
chests.
are. They're really long. I mean, bigger than this. And one of them had 49 longbows in it, and one of them had 50 longbows in it. And that was a real challenge, because to raise one of these chests whole, we had to make a modern box just bigger than the chest and take that down, and then place the longbow box in it, and then raise it to the surface. So it's a bit like how we raised the ship in the end.
And again, did you open the lid when you were still down there and go, wow?
Well, one of them, we actually opened the lid and looked at underwater, and there are films of Margaret looking at all these longbows underwater, but the other one, we raised whole without opening the lid, and opened it on the surface, and that was really nice, because some people were then able to excavate it on the surface who didn't never go diving.
They had a bit of
so
fun.
they had some of the experience of finding all the longbows.
And of course the longbow is this amazing longbow made of...
Yew. Yeah. So, I mean, what is...
And were they already... Did they have the strings hanging from the tip like you do in...
Well, we didn't actually find any strings at the time, or the knock ends, which are the ends that hold the string. Well, we did find them in the collection 10 or 20 years later. So not everything was found at the time of the diving.
Yeah. So as part of the museum and the fun of it, you've got these bows. These are replicas.
Exactly.
Not a real thing. But what is this to demonstrate? Just how difficult it is?
Exactly. So members of the public can use these replica bows to see how difficult it is. And you hold the bow, you can adjust it to the right height. It's just like this, so it's screwed to the wall. And then you have to push at the same time as pulling all the way back to your chin, and then let go. This has a piston on it, so it doesn't hurt anyone.
Right.
But I hope you're going to have a go on it.
Well, yes, I mean, I do know that they're incredibly difficult to shoot, aren't they?
Yeah, well, so if you push with if you put this hand on the bottom there, if you swap
this
hands,
one?
yeah, and then you pull back with that hand as you push. That's it. Pull back all the way to your chin if you can, all the way to your chin. Yeah, that's very impressive. I'm very impressed.
Well, I am, actually.
But imagine, I mean, that's about £35. That's about £50. The Tudor longbows, some of them were over £100.
And an archer would be on a ship like the Mary Rose, in battle, shooting how many arrows a minute?
Well, we have an expert archer who helped us and helped make the films, and he was doing about 10 a minute. And if you can imagine, this is 1545, and you wonder, why are we using longbows? But they were very accurate, and they could fire 10 times a minute, whereas you imagine a musket, you're lucky if they fire every 2 minutes. So this still has a very, very good rate of firepower.
Again, tells you just a little bit more about how they lived in those days and how they fought.
Yeah.
Henry VIII, as we know, had many loves, some of them sadly fleeting. He was 20 and married to Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, when the Mary Rose was built. And he was about 54 and married to his last wife, Catherine Parr, when she sank. It was, of course, a tragedy when she foundered, but the ship and her crew have left us a vivid legacy and handed us a window into Tudor times, giving us a glimpse of life in the 1500s. It's something in which Prince Charles became hugely interested and took part in 9 dives on the wreck himself. Now King, he is still a very active president of the Mary Rose Trust.
To me, the Mary Rose means a huge amount because it was a remarkable achievement, I think, and showed fantastic qualities of diving expertise. It was Alexander McKee. He was very keen to make me aware of what was going on. And he got me to dive for the first time on the wreck. And Margaret Rule, the maritime archaeologist, was terrific because her enthusiasm was unstoppable. Now, I thought they were fantastic because they were diving endlessly, particularly in the bad visibility. I'd love to be able to just wish them well and to congratulate them again on this remarkable achievement.
The Mary Rose wreck site is one of the most important archaeological sites in the world, and the location continues to be monitored and protected by the Mary Rose Trust.